Mojo story. There was a clash between Indian and Chinese soldiers in the Tawang sector of Arunachal Pradesh on Friday that caused injuries to soldiers from both the sides. Now, Defense Minister Rajnath Singh has made a statement in the parliament about the incident. He's informed the parliament that no Indian soldier was killed or severely injured. According to reports, a large number of Chinese troops, a few hundred of them, a couple of hundred of them, were armed with clubs and sticks, much like when they had entered the Indian territory in eastern Ladakh 2 years ago. But this time, the Indian troops were not taken by surprise, but they were actually prepared for the clash, it seems, and gave a befitting response to the Chinese, forcing them to retreat. And we're told since then the situation has normalized. The commanders of both the armies have met after the incident, and now the things are normal on the ground. To discuss this, we're joined by an eminent panel. We're joined by Major General Dhruv Katoch, who joins us from the India Foundation. Is also a defense expert. Welcome to the show. We're also joined by uh, uh, Aadil Brar, who's also a defense expert. He joins us. Welcome to the show, Aadil. We're joined by Ajai Shukla, who's a senior journalist. He joins us, and Ambassador Phunchok Stobdan, former diplomat. He also joins us on the show. Welcome to the show, all. If I can start with you, Ajay, I was reading your tweet which mentioned that 35 Indian soldiers were injured. Seven of them were critically injured and they were moved to the hospital in Guwahati. What are your sources telling you on the ground? How did this start in the first place? And what is the situation after the commanders of both the sides met and sort of, de-escalated the flare-up that had happened there?
By going by what my sources on the ground tell me, there were certain injuries on both sides. I mean, they had gone on at each other with sticks and clubs and staves and were not leaving, anything to the imagination. The aim was to hurt, and the Chinese had come to do that. Fortunately, as you brought out in your opening narrative, the Indian side was fully prepared, and they sort of drove them back and they drove them into their own camp. Now, during this process, my sources tell me 35 Indian soldiers were injured, seven of them seriously. By serious, one would gather that it means that there were fractures, there were cuts, there
Yes.
were sort of limbs broken, but there was no body who needed to be sort of taken into intensive care or into surgery or
Right.
anything like that.
Right. So they were seriously injured, but there were no fatal casualties. The
No.
Indian side was very much prepared. But Adil, coming to you, what according to you emboldened the Chinese to really intrude into the Indian side in Tawang, which we believe is heavily guarded by the Indian forces?
I think this intrusion that we just saw is not something new. We've seen something similar in 2021. There was an intrusion in the sector. There have been increasing intrusion in the sector, and that's primarily because China is building up its infrastructure. China is building new villages in the area, the new Xiaokang villages, and it's also building new infrastructure, including roads that connect Medoc with Ningchi. There's a road which has reduced the travel time from 8 hours to about 3.5 hours. And the reason China is doing that is they want to project power across the Arunachal sector, not just the Wang. We actually see this towards eastern side as well. There have been consistent intrusions, and these patrols try to keep the existing agreements so they don't bring guns and other things, but they use everything else that's possible. So China wants to maintain this asymmetry versus India, especially when it comes to the border regions, the road and the infrastructure that they have. And with this intrusion, I think what the media sources are saying, Chinese were trying to get access to the Yangtze peak. That's approximately 17,000 and plus peak that's in the area. It would have given China a very good view of the whole sector, and they could have watched what India was up to. So I think that's the primary goal that China is trying. You should also remember there's another area within that sector. It's the Chumi Gyatsar. There's a waterfall that China claims is part of their territory. So there's a whole nationalist rhetoric around taking that back from the Indian army. And they've been trying this for a long time to bring it back.
So clearly, the aim was to alter the status quo, as is being said. Couple of hundred soldiers coming in. It was not a normal patrol. Major General Dhruv Katoch.
Oh, absolutely. The aim was to alter the LAC. Now, I want to bring out why this area is important. You see, when you are looking at the Tawang sector, we are looking at from the Tri Junction up to where the glaciers start, and the glaciers start at Yangtze, and that's about 30. The difference in between is about 40 kilometers. Now, even the Yangtze, when you're looking at the peaks, they are glaciated peaks. But we occupied this peak in 1987 in the Somdrong-Chu as a sequel to the Somdrong-Chu incident. So when we are actually looking at this terrain, we find something very interesting here. From the, there are 2 points which I would like to clarify. From the Tri-Junction up to Bumla, which is the meeting point where we have our flag meetings and all that, the area is very well guarded and very well defined. So there is no question of either intrusion or anything else taking place in this area. On the extreme west, we have the Namkachu. The Chinese are on the Thagla Ridge, and we are on the ridge to the south of the Namkachu. In between is the river, the Niamjiangchu, which runs north to south. And then we have the Langrola feature on the east of the river. And on this feature, when we are looking at this feature, there are high points on either side. So the Chinese are on one side, we are on the other. It is very well defined. This is the place where the Somdrong-Chu incident took place when Sundarji was the chief. And then we go down right up to Bumla, which is a very friendly spot, I can call it now, where both the sides meet regularly for flag meetings, and a whole host of tourists come. But the problem is when we go to Yangtze, now Yangtze is another 10-15 kilometers further east of Bumla. The thing is, when you use Yangtze as a point, you can actually carry out a turning movement and turn the defenses which are there of Thagla. So it is a very sensitive point for India, and it is a very sensitive point as far as the Chinese are concerned. Now we have occupied the ridgelines, and the Chinese have been attempting really to occupy the ridgelines since then. But the question is, once their patrols come forward, because we are on the ridgeline, we can see them coming. Our patrols go down to meet them, and then the patrols meet, and the situation is diffused on the spot. Right. This time, I think they were under the impression. I'm simply guessing. I really don't know. I think they were under the impression that some of the posts had been winter vacated by the army. The army carries out winter vacation of these posts, but it had not been done. In fact, the posts had been reinforced because the army had anticipated some movement of that nature. They had seen extra movement taking place on the Chinese side. Yeah. So when this large force came, I mean, they are talking about 300 men. It could be possible. I really don't know the number. But when they came, then they were accosted, and then the fisticuffs and all took place, and people were injured on both sides. Actually, the number of injuries, Bagheera, it is not really important. The more important thing is, why have the Chinese done it? And I think when we're looking into the motives, I don't think that the motives lie in Beijing by Xi Jinping or any part of the political establishment. I think the local army commander wanted to sort of impose his authority on his troops and tell Beijing, listen, I can do this. This is quite possible in military parlance. I know what happens on the border. So I have a feeling something like this must have happened. Nothing more than that. Because in my view, Tawang sector is not a place where the Chinese would like to have a showdown. This is the place where they will be defeated. There are other places.
It could have been a localized, a tactical move by a local commander that he ordered his troops to carry out this action.
Possible.
But Ambassador Phunchok Stobdan, would you also agree that besides the motives that have been highlighted by Major General Dhruv Katoch, it could also be China showing India in a poor light, a weaker nation compared to China, put out that impression?
Well, that could be only an assumption. one cannot really establish that kind of fact. But
Yeah.
I agree with General Katoch that as far as India front is concerned, the PLA in the Western Theatre Command enjoys full authority. Beijing has no say. The PLA in this sector is quite different from PLA in other sector. So I think they have the authority, they have the understanding, the knowledgeable people are posted in this area. So to me, I don't know. Tawang area is very sensitive, more sensitive than Ladakh. There is an international dimension. There is a US dimension in Tawang, partly because fact is that if the only motivation factor for the Chinese would have been that we had a military exercise in Uttarakhand recently, where
Yeah.
the American diplomat said none of your business, and
Yes.
the Chinese said you violated 1996 agreement. That could have been one of the political motivation or for the PLA. It's not a political matter; it's a military. I think the PLA which reacted to that joint military exercise. They could have been quite disturbed about that point of thing. But the point is not that. I think the Yangtze could be that they would answer immediately or in a period of time. And I see the kind of reports that I get that they might open CNN Junction front anytime. As it is since yesterday, a lot of nomads from our side has moved into Kakjung, which is the pasture land grazing area between China and India and Tibet. It's a common grazing ground. The Chinese come and we go. Although it could be a civilian kind of a conflict, but it might get flared up this time. And I expect
So you think that China could open up perhaps another front somewhere else in a different
yeah,
way?
that would be tactical. That would be tactical, and
Yeah.
they might open some kind of a new front where they would repeat the same thing. They would have been emboldened by what they did in Eastern Ladakh by doing such kind of things in Tawang.
Right.
They were successful initially in 2020, 2021, till very recently when they had to disengage. But perhaps in Arunachal Pradesh also they could repeat the same, kind of a operation.
Right, but this happened on 9th, on 12th. It came. The news broke. Since then, we've seen sharp responses from India. Foreign Minister Jaishankar said that India will not accept any change in status quo, any change in status quo on the ground. China altering the line of actual control. He made a statement in the parliament. Before that, Defense Minister Rajnath Singh also spoke. If we can play those sound bites before we go further.
Diplomatically, we have been very clear. We have been very clear with the Chinese that we will not tolerate, we will not countenance attempts to unilaterally change the line of actual control, and that so long as they continue to seek to do that, and if they have built up forces which in our minds constitute a serious concern in the border areas, then our relationship is not normal. And the abnormality of that has been in evidence in the last few years. Meanwhile, the military commanders continue to engage each other, and I think given the sensitivity of that matter, it is something which is left to the military commanders to deal with, and I think the House should be understanding of the national sensitivity of such a delicate matter.
Yes, and also there were some reports that Indian jets were also scrambled. Some news reports suggested, Ajay, that could really point to a serious situation on the ground.
You mean if jets were scrambled?
Yes.
Well, my understanding is that there was no sort of undue or sort of abnormal aviation activity. There were the
Right.
usual helicopters flying, including a Chinook that goes and does winter supplying to the posts, which cannot be reached by vehicles on the ground. But this matter was resolved before it came to scrambling aircraft and so on.
Yeah.
But it's important for the Chinese to see and to be demonstrated how
Yeah.
India will react in situations like this. Now, that is extremely important. When the Eastern Ladakh incursions took place, the Indian establishment made the mistake of denying that there were any incursions, made the mistake of pretending that the situation was normal, and the Chinese were thereby further emboldened, saying, the Indian establishment is actually echoing what we are saying. So we are on firm ground over here. Now, this time, that must definitely not happen. India must show that it is going to deal with any kind of intrusions, incursions, whatever you call them, with a firm hand, that the Chinese will not be allowed to get away with even 1 inch of territory being usurped. And I'm glad to see that appears to have happened so far. So let's look and see whether the Chinese take this any further. My guess is they won't.
Adil, Brar, do you think that the message has gone across that this time India's reaction is different compared to what it did 2 years ago? There was no clarity at that point in time. There were different voices coming from different directions, but this time there was a clear response on the ground and also politically. Do you think that it could be a one-off incident, or perhaps you believe that there could be more such incidents?
I agree with Ajay when he mentioned that, this time India sent that message across to Beijing that we are not going to have business as usual. We saw there were some videos leaked which are not from this incident, but this is
Yeah,
again India trying to kind of change the narrative, trying to do something new. And I think China will escalate on their side by probably leaking more pictures, videos in the coming days, and they will try to get an upper hand, at the situation, because now they look
yeah.
like they tried to do something, they were not successful. So we will see some kind of escalation. I'm not sure if it will be military escalation right away, but it might be more diplomatic, more of propaganda escalation in the short term. So we'll see more of that in the coming days. Even opening up maybe Tibet card or Arunachal, how India controls these areas, it doesn't really have authority over them. So we might see some of this come up.
Major General Dhruv Katoch, you would agree that first I would want to mention about that video. There is this viral video about Indian soldiers pushing back the Chinese. We're not using that video. That's an old video, but obviously perhaps from that same sector. But it's an old video where Indian soldiers are pushing back. So we might see some more videos over the next few days. But Major General Dhruv Katoch, would you agree that this may not be a one-off incident, perhaps not here, but somewhere else or in some other form, Chinese could really escalate the matters?
You see, let me put it across in a slightly different way.
Yeah,
It is my view, and I've held this view for a very long time, that at some future point of time, war with China is inevitable. I'm not even talking about these incursions. A war is inevitable because China wants to control the Himalayas, right? And China will go to war. India will not go to war. China will go to war the day China feels they can win it. So obviously, the counter to that is that if so long as India is strong and prepared, that eventuality will not take place because China is China is absolutely afraid of a defeat. The Chinese Communist Party, they cannot go to their people with a defeat. So unless they are absolutely 100% certain of victory, they are not going to go in for that war. And it is our job to ensure that they never achieve that level of certainty. That is one.
yeah,
In the meantime, I think this type of nibbling action, China will continue both in the Ladakh sector and in the eastern sector, especially in Arunachal, because when you go further east towards the Lohit Valley, you see something quite different. The China has built up their roads right up to the LAC, whereas India still does not have the road. We are building them now. That process started about 7-8 years back, but we didn't have those roads, and I think that remains a challenge. So how we are going to address that challenge in that particular area remains to be seen. But I foresee a lot of nibbling actions by China, both in Ladakh. Ladakh, I think they'll be stymied. It'll be a bit difficult for them to do it there. But in Arunachal, I think when we're going further east of the Niamjiangchu, as I told you, we've got about 100 kilometers of glacier beyond that. And then you come to the Subansiri River Valley, etc. So those are the places where I think they may actually try to, push forward, say a kilometer, 2 kilometers, hold, and then carry on. This is what they have been doing for many, many years. And I think this sort of action they will do, short of a war, which they will go to if they have the assurance in their own minds, in the minds of the political and the military leaders, that they can win it. Zaffar.
Right, right. Phunchok, Stobdan, we've been talking about all these factors, but one thing comes to mind: could it also be a diversion about the internal issues in China and India's growing clout internationally? As I was saying, showing India in a poor light, a weaker country on the ground.
Well, I think given the fact that the G20 is been
Yes.
projected as a very, very big thing in India, even at the popular level, uh, both Pakistan and China would like to see that this is derailed. That's quite
Yeah.
obvious. But it is more, I think, Pakistan which might do that. Chinese are not known for doing such things. Yes, the India stature, the whole process is actually about the campaign for UNSC membership in whatever form, whether G20 or
Yeah.
other form. I think Chinese, any case, would not like that to happen. That's a big issue, obviously, at the larger, big picture geopolitical issue. But to me, I think in the Eastern Ladakh, we have a lot of unsettled issues. I mean, if Tawang, we could push them back, why
Yeah.
not in Depsang, where they're still sitting on PP 11, 12, 13, 14, up to 13? Why not? Why not? Why they're not even willing to discuss that,
Right.
to bring that on the agenda of the commander level meetings?
Yeah.
So there are flashpoints everywhere in the Himalayas. So I don't see things are going to end at this place in Tawang. It might flare up, but timing I don't know whether this is the right time. Whether the Chinese will do that, whether it suits us. Next year, or 2014, we have elections, so I don't see that happening at the moment. But all possibilities are there.
Ajay, an important point that what happened in Eastern Ladakh 2 years ago, the negotiations are going on, rounds and rounds of dialogue between military commanders. But what has happened in the initial, initially when China intruded, that's happened. China has grabbed that area, and now the negotiations are going on. They are possibly forcing India to accept the ground realities now. So here it's a different situation. The Chinese the Indians didn't allow the Chinese to make any change on the ground. But that we come to the basic point that why does China disregard the understandings and the pacts as far as SOPs are concerned on the ground? I believe there are clear cut pacts between the two countries, understandings how to deal with the situation on the ground. China seemed to be violating them.
Yeah, Zafar, China follows certain norms in the conduct of foreign and security policy. And one of the key norms that it follows is if you can get away with it, do it. They would sort of not hesitate in taking control of another country's territory, redelineating the maritime boundaries with your country, your neighbors, who would otherwise be friendly towards you. But China does, when it comes to choosing between securing a tactical or a strategic objective and being popular and friendly and well liked, clearly option one is China's preferred choice. So that is what happened in this particular case in Eastern Ladakh. Uh, we were naive. We got caught with our pants down. We sort of paid a price, and I think that we should absolutely not treat this Eastern Ladakh incident as resolved. We need to continue bargaining. We need to continue talking. We need to insist on getting our territory back. Otherwise, the minute you give in, China will see it as, well, here's one
Yeah,
more
yeah,
situation in the
yeah,
bag. So, Arunachal Pradesh, frankly speaking, India defends too strongly for China to get away with anything. The
yeah,
defenses in Ladakh are comparatively light,
yeah,
comparatively
yeah,
weak. Until
yeah,
this incident took place, now we've beefed those up also. But
yeah.
in Arunachal, I don't think we need to be too worried at this point in time. The defenses are good. The people are clear about what they need to do, and as we've seen in this latest incident, we can handle it when it happens on the ground.
Yes, we can handle it because, of course, Arunachal is a different sort of a region, and Ladakh is a different region. Though in both the regions, India is faced with the same adversary. But Adil, coming to you, how should India, uh, deal with China in those circumstances? The points that Ajay was raising, the way the Chinese look into things and the way they capture the land and they just go about doing it every year, nibbling those areas and moving on. How should India deal with a country like that?
I think we'll have to look at what has been done in South China Sea, where China has a whole gray zone tactic strategy, where they, take over islands and build islands. We'll have to use what US is doing right now with freedom of navigation, patrol in these areas, and seek patrolling rights, and make them very clear that this is where our lines are. And if we don't talk about
Yeah.
the way this has been discussed in the recent incident, if we don't talk about it, it will be hushed away and we'll lose more territory. So we'll have to use some of these tactics that Japan, US, and other countries use when it comes to gray zone style of tactics, short of war, taking territory, sending patrols. You have to equally project power and build your infrastructure. You have to settle people in these areas. China is building these small villages all across LAC, and that's how they project the power, by keeping people there, by changing the reality on the ground. India has to equally build roads, villages, 5G network in these areas to make sure that we are present there and China cannot alter the reality forever.
India has to pay back in the same coin, at least as far as infrastructure is concerned, roads are concerned. They are very vital. Major General Dhruv Katoch, last word to you before we wrap up.
You're right. You see, on the infrastructure front, because I commanded the division in Arunachal in Tawang Sector, and I've also operated on the Kashmir front. The entire area. We have been weak as far as the border areas are concerned on infrastructure, uh, but that is the thing of history now. I think over the last at least 5 to 6 years, there is a tremendous push on this infrastructure, and these roads and bridges are coming up in a very fast rate now. I've never seen that happening earlier, which is what I'm observing now. So that bit is being looked after, but we must remember that the Chinese have got a much easier side as far as road construction capability is concerned. They are on a plateau. Most of their area is flat. It may be at an altitude of 16 to 17,000 feet, but it is much easier for them. And for us, we have got a lot of catching up to do. But I think over the next, say, it may take a decade even from now, 5 years to a decade, but we will catch up. That is the point of concern to the Chinese as to why we catch up, because especially in eastern Ladakh, when our infrastructure becomes better, then they feel threatened as far as the highway, I think it's Highway 344, which goes through the Aksai Chin. They feel threatened as far as that highway is concerned. But having said that, infrastructure is just one part of the game. In my view, deterrence is required, and to put it this way, we need strong military capability to deter the Chinese, especially in terms of air power. As an infantry officer, I'm emphasizing this, especially in terms of air power and airspace capability, cyber capability. Once we have that, and China knows that they will be in trouble if they do something, uh, we avoid war. So to avoid war, India, I think the only strategy which we need to follow is to be strong militarily, economically, and politically, and then we can have peace. But if it comes to war, well, then we'll fight it, and I have absolutely no doubts that when we fight it, this time we are going to win it, and win it very, very decisively.
Perhaps the reason that Chinese are frustrated and they are doing these intrusions frequently. But that brings us to the end of our discussion. Thanks to all our panelists for joining us. That's all we have in the show. Thanks for watching.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.